Well, here we go. Welcome. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining CLTCOA's very first webinar. Very excited to be conducting this webinar today. The goal of today's webinar is to guide you and to assist you as you are meeting with assembly members and your state senators about the CLTCOA funding request and the just general good information for having district outreach meetings with the local legislators. Today on the line, I'm very excited to be introducing Ernie Powell. He is the consultant that CLTCOA hired for our program funding efforts this year. Ernie, are you on the line?
I certainly am, and thank you.
Excellent. I have to give a little bit of bragging rights here. Ernie was 19 years with AARP as the association's Associate State Director and Advocacy Manager for the AARP California. And more recently, he spent 2 years in Washington, D.C. as a grassroots director for the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. Ernie is an ombudsman fan. He's a supporter, and he has been very valuable in helping CLTCOA as we are striving for our funding efforts this year. And I'm excited because he just has so much practical information that I really am confident it's going to help the average coordinator, volunteer, program supporter as they are advocating for their local program, but also advocating for the whole funding request. I'm also going to be covering some parts of today's webinar. So let me forward here we go. So I just told you about Ernie, and I'm Leza Coleman. I'm the Executive Director. Molly Davies, she led the first webinar. She's letting Ernie and I lead this one. So we are happy for her input as well as the input from the other team members. Today's learning objectives is the history of the Ombudsman Program as a social justice movement, the current status of our general funding request, and truly our need for outreach from the district offices, the mechanics of meeting with legislators in the district office, and an overview of the CLTCOA funding effort where we are today, as well as supportive materials. The history of the long-term care ombudsman program, it started out as a collection of citizens groups. Claire Thompson wrote an incredible report, Old Age, the Last Segregation, and her report and others in the early 70s brought to light truly the atrocities that were going on behind closed doors in skilled nursing facilities across the country. And because of her report and others, Congress held several hearings, hearing testimonies, and also proposing regulations for changes in the nursing home industry. The very first White House Conference on Aging in 1971, it helped to establish the investigative unit to respond to complaints in long-term care facilities, and they identified that the Ombudsman Program would be that investigative unit. It's been 35 years since the first White House Commission on Aging, and they gave us this mandate to go out, and they gave us the title of Ombudsman because it meant a person who listens to the complaints of individual citizens about the government and tries to resolve them in an impartial manner. That just speaks to me. It resonates with what we do. We seek to increase the government's responsiveness and accountability. We speak for the individual person. I think it's really important to note that the driving intent of the program back in 1971 and still today, it is to force the government and the nursing home industry to be held accountable for the well-being of residents. Sometimes I think ombudsman programs tend to downplay our role And you really need to be proud of this, because the Ombudsman program as a federal entity is very unique. There are very few organizations or entities that have a day-to-day function, but also have a responsibility for systemic advocacy. We are very unique in this. I would have to say that it was the loss of the general funds which caused the California local programs to kind of look up and see how should we be working, banding together with this association, CLTCOA, to make systemic change. And while the loss of that funding has had just devastating effects to local programs, and I don't wish to minimize that, I am proud that it has brought us together. And currently, CLTCOA is the most active long-term care ombudsman association across the nation. And other states are looking to CLTCOA for what we're doing in our funding efforts. So getting back to this idea that ombudsman programs not only have a day-to-day activity, they also have a systems or systemic advocacy. You want to look at issues in your local program and identify, is this problem that you are working with, is this really an individual problem? Is it a problem in just one facility or one policy of one corporation? Or is this a larger problem? Is this a problem that should be addressed with legislation? Or is it a problem that you just have education to a particular staff person or facility? When you're thinking about these problems that are occurring at your local level, I would encourage you to think about, has effort been made to speak with the local legislators about this problem? Do our legislators get more visits from the nursing home industry than they do from the residents and from the family members and from the ombudsman programs? That was a trick question because I know the answer to that question. They do get a lot more visitors from the nursing home industry. The nursing home industry and the assisted living industry have very, very powerful lobbyists. But I encourage you to go and meet with your legislators, because while they may have better suits, trust me, you have better stories and you have right on your side. So today, we're going to be focusing on how do you make those appointments in your local offices. And I'm going to turn it over to Ernie, because he has so much to teach us on this area. So, Ernie, all yours.
Well, thank you, Lisa. Well done. And as Lisa just mentioned, what we're going to talk about during my portion is what you, your staff, advisory committee, executive, board, volunteers, and allies need to know to be best prepared when meeting with elected officials or lead staff at the district office. This webinar is about how best to prepare you and your team for the important tactic of meeting with your elected official. The goal of meeting with elected officials is to win a vote for our legislative budget proposal for the local long-term care ombudsman programs. That is our goal, is to win the vote. Our secondary goals are to build an ongoing relationship with the local office and to develop grassroots participation and leadership. The steps before the meeting. You want to make sure that you research background on the elected official. You want to make sure that you ask questions where you need to ask questions, either with consultants or by looking through the internet or known associates of people that know the elected official, or calling Lisa about background on the elected official. You want to know the CLTCOA funding proposal and know what its content is and the principles behind it in the two-page ask, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. The next two steps are to assemble and prepare a visiting team. We highly recommend that you take a group of people of either 3 to 5 people and we highly recommend when you do your visit, and we highly recommend that those people be voting constituents from the district of the legislator that you're visiting. And of course, steps before the meeting, the final step is to actually request the meeting with the elected official. What you need to review prior to the meeting is as follows. Number one, the talking points become the basis of the meeting agenda, and we will provide that for you every time. So prior to the meeting, the talking points become the basis of the meeting agenda. You need to be clear about your specific requests. You need to determine who from your group doing the visit will cover which items and topics, and you need to stay on topic and message. You need to make sure that you're prepared by having a pre-meeting with your team. During that pre-meeting, you want to do the following. Review the background of the team. That means you know who from the team is there, the organization they represent, the specific kind of expertise that they have as an asset to you communicating with the elected official, or if it's not the elected official, the staff person. So you want to review the background of your team. Next, you want to review the issue itself. And then you want to assign and practice various roles, and then do a role play. This is during your pre-meeting. You want to do a role play so that everybody feels like they're rehearsed, not automated, not too rehearsed, but natural in terms of the statements they're going to make and the points they're going to cover. If the meeting is with a staff member of the legislator, okay, one of the things you will do always is request a follow-up face-to-face meeting with the legislator himself or herself as a follow-up to a meeting with a staffer. So you always want to do that. You always want to, if you're meeting with a staff member, to make sure that you request as part of the content of your ask a follow-up meeting with the legislator, him or herself. In requesting a meeting with a legislator, number one, some offices will schedule a meeting from a phone call. Some will request an email or a letter. Either way is fine. Just remember to get contact names and emails in order to schedule the appointment. All right? So those are the basics on how to request a meeting. You need to assemble your internal materials. Your internal materials are background research about the legislator, perhaps past votes, what that legislator has done on care issues, on how they've dealt with regulatory questions related to, again, to long-term care issues. So you want to do your background research about that legislator. You want to look at recent press articles, recent or past press articles, again, with an emphasis on what the legislator has done around care facilities and long-term care. You want to look at internal notes from past meetings. That means you need to work with either myself as your consultant or the lobbyists we have in Sacramento or with Leza to see what trends are apparent with that legislator. What has he or she done in the past? You need to look at the history of the relationship and the history of their behaviors. And of course, part of your internal materials is simply your personal calendar so that you can do future follow-up and set up future follow-up meetings. The next thing you want to do is assemble your leave-behind materials. Leave-behind materials are materials that you are taking into the meeting with the legislator or the staff person. So it's always the two-page ask. It's the backup material that support the two-page ask, local program data, business cards for everybody as part of your group, relevant press stories that support our position, our ombudsman brochures, and success stories of local residents who have benefited from the ombudsman. program. So those are what we call leave behinds, and those are things you give as you to the legislator when you meet with him or her or his or her staff. When you get to the meeting, you actually have the meeting, you need to stick to a very specific plan. So the day of the meeting is, that means you arrive at the district office where you're having the meeting at least 15 minutes early. You review the plan agenda. You make sure the internal documents stay with your group and are not distributed to the district staff or the legislator. So you stick to the plan having to do with the day of the meeting. Here's some tips having to do with the what you do during the meeting. Number one, do not use acronyms. Do not use acronyms because you need to assume that this is a learning experience for both your own delegation as well as the staff or the legislator that you're meeting with. So don't use acronyms. Do not speak for more than 2 minutes. Make sure you do good message management, which means that you stay on topic. Be open to questions. If you don't have an answer, promise to get back to them with one and then follow through accordingly. These are tips having to do with the actual meeting itself. Following this sequence, you also want to make sure that you make introductions of the team. The key here is to show to the legislator that you have deep and strong support for our position from the community. Explain the role of the ombudsman briefly. What does the ombudsman do? What problems does the ombudsman deal with in terms of the residents and the facility, resident families, et cetera, et cetera. Have examples and data of outstanding and or poor performing facilities in the actual district that legislator represents. Tell human stories related to local facilities. Make the ask. Make the direct ask for the support for the funding request. Go over the leave behind materials, walk through them methodically, and agree on follow-up actions if needed. Most of all, listen, listen, and listen. When you leave the meeting, you will know where you stand. If you get a yes from your legislator, you know that you got a positive and good response. You cannot get any other answers but the following: a yes to our ask, a no to our ask, and if you get a no, find out why and find out how to get to a yes. You may get a maybe. If you get a maybe, find out what it takes to get to a yes. You may get a request for more information, or I will share this information with the legislator. That's typically the response of the staffer. So if you get a request from a staffer because the legislator wasn't there, it will typically be about more information that he or she will want to share with the legislator. And always, as I said before, ask for a follow-up meeting with the elected official for your group. And agree to and finally, when you leave the meeting, you know the following. You know that you've agreed to a time frame on following up. Before you leave, be sure to thank your delegates, the people that went with you to the meeting, for attending the meeting. For some, this is very easy. For others, this is a very big deal. So always show your gratitude for the time that they spent with you in working to get support for our program and our fundamental ask. Also, after the meeting, do a debrief. Review requests for additional information and get general and specific impressions of what happened at the meeting. Document the meeting via the legislative report form and determine who is responsible for the thank you note. In the debrief, you should cover these items noted in the slide. That means review the information you learned, review the documents and then use the document, which is called the legislative report form, and determine who is responsible for the thank you note. Okay, I'm going to turn it back. I'm going to turn it back to Leza. You will do fine at these meetings. If you have any questions, certainly call Leza or myself. We have given you our contact information, and have confidence when you go on these meetings, because we know that this is an important issue, and that legislators need to pay attention to. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernie. That's just really good, practical how-to. So I hope folks will go back to those slides and check them off as they accomplish their various tasks. Now, as we're going into the third part of the webinar, it's to really dial into the nuts and bolts of the funding request. And so over the next few slides, we're going to talk about the reasoning, the rationale behind the CLTCOA funding request for this year, the two-page ask, the 2015 CLTCOA data flyer, and the ask again, the ask of the legislator or staff for their support of our budget request. When we were looking at deciding what the basis of the funding request was going to be about, we looked at all the different critical roles that the long-term care ombudsman plays. It was important to focus in on what makes us special and unique. When we thought about the success that we got last year, because we did get a certain measure of success in our funding request last year. We did get the vote of the Assembly. We did not get the vote of the Senate, and thus we didn't get the vote of the governor. But we did make it through the Assembly, and we did get some very good feedback on our first attempt at a general funding request. And we had to go back and identify, what is it we do that makes us special and unique? Because many of the legislators look to us as being a toothless arm of licensing. Why spend money on the Ombudsman program if you're already spending money for the Department of Public Health for licensing and certification, or community care licensing? And so we had to say, this is why. Now, the long-term care ombudsman program is the only health and services program that is required by both federal and state laws to maintain a regular presence in nursing homes, residential care facilities for the elderly, adult residential care facilities, and social rehabilitation facilities. We are required by mandate to provide regular and unannounced visits to facilities not in response to a complaint, provide opportunities for ombudsman representatives to observe conditions in facilities, where to identify, prevent, and provide early intervention. The long-term care ombudsman program, we are to investigate, we're to seek to resolve complaints on behalf of the residents of nursing homes and residential care facilities. The ombudsman representative is to take steps to resolve these complaints before residents are injured or suffered unwarranted consequences. We are the proactive arm. We are to intervene to help ensure best possible outcomes for quality of care, for quality of life for residents. It is the regular unannounced visits by the ombudsman that save the state of California money by detecting and resolving complaints before they escalate into crimes requiring the involvement of law enforcement, regulatory agencies, licensing and certification, community care licensing. We also reduce the costs associated with the medical services that residents have to experience with escalating medical care due to harm. So when we were looking at all the different roles of what the ombudsman do, we had to decide what was the thing that we could say gives us the biggest bang for our buck. And so we decided that the unannounced facility visits is the greatest potential for good that the local long-term care ombudsman provides. And we look to the Federal Administration on Aging as that standard because they've determined that for a resident to feel safe in their home, they need regular and timely access to an ombudsman. And the Older Americans Act defines regular visits as being weekly, monthly, or quarterly. So we know when ombudsmen have frequent presence in long-term care facilities, they are able to establish trust with residents so that residents are more likely to report abuse and neglect. We also know that when ombudsmen conduct frequent unannounced facility visits, they are able to identify problems and take steps to remedy these issues on behalf of the residents who often are unable to do so themselves. And more importantly, with regular unannounced visits, ombudsmen are better able to educate the facility residents regarding their rights and thus allowing residents to self-advocate whenever possible. So with the idea that we wanted to get back into facilities on a quarterly basis, we said, what is it going to take to get us to that place? The actual cost to have staff and volunteers in every facility on a quarterly basis, we projected at $2.784 million. And if we had that additional $2.8 million, we could get back into facilities on a quarterly basis. To make that goal happen, we're going to have to do more recruiting and supporting of our volunteers. And so we're looking at a little over $350,000 for the supervision and training of those additional volunteers. And statistically, we know the more times we get into a facility, the more complaints we are going to receive and to self-generate. And so we're estimating that it's going to take about $1.1 million to cover the additional 6,000 complaints that we anticipate in our first year of getting back to quarterly visits. So when this webinar is completed, we will be emailing out the formal two-page ask. And this two-page ask goes through several parts. It has the financial breakdown of the request. It talks about the roles of the Ombudsman program, specifically identifying the 3 separate monitoring agencies. And we did look to the Federal Older Americans Act, which did give us language that made us feel very comfortable in saying that the Long-Term Care Ombudsman program is, in fact, one of the 3 separate monitoring agencies. So if you get a little pressed on that, we can give you supporting documentation. So we are part of the 3, part of DPH, part of community care licensing. And then one of the other sections of the ask is about the quarterly unannounced visits and why they're so important, a section on elder abuse and how it is underreported, and then background information for the funding request itself. When we looked at, and I mentioned before about the quarterly visits and how did we derive at this $2.7 million, it was because it's going to take 123,000 hours of both staff and volunteers to get us back to that place where we would hit 100%. We also know that recruiting and training volunteers takes a lot of time from the paid staff. We anticipate, it's estimated that during an ombudsman's first year, it takes about 100 hours of paid staff time to recruit, to train, and to do the ongoing support that they need to feel confident in their advocacy work out into the field. And then, again, the estimated 6,000 additional complaints through the extra activity that we're doing. The 2015 CLTCOA data flyer, this flyer is very data rich, and it is a bit overwhelming when you look at it, but it's very important to have this data to point out to the legislators why we're making the request. And so the first section talks about the history of our complaint data over the last 5 years, because we have had a decrease in over 14,000 complaints in the last 5 years. And initially, legislators pushed back last year when we said, well, we had a decrease last year. It was even more last year. It was 16,000. They said, well, then that must mean that care is getting better. But if you look at this chart, it identifies that we get complaints from residents directly. Complaints are generated by ombudsmen as they're out in the fields, and complaints are received from facilities themselves. And if you look at the complaints for the last 5 years, the facilities themselves are reporting at a higher level. So it's not that care has gotten better over the last 5 years, it's that we have been in the facilities on fewer opportunities. And so you'll notice the number of complaints that we receive directly from residents and the number of complaints that we generate from ombudsman visits themselves has decreased. Because if we're not in there, we're not developing that trust. And if we're not developing that trust, then residents aren't able to share with us their concern. I particularly like this section, facility count data. This points out something that most of the legislators are really key in. Over the last 5 years, when you're looking at our facilities, we've lost over 100 skilled nursing facilities. These are our Medi-Cal beds. This is a very touchy area. Lots of people don't like skilled nursing facilities and would rather people didn't have to live in them. And I certainly wouldn't want to live in one either. Right? However, whether we're there for rehabilitation or for long-term custodial, we want to have advocates in there to ensure the best quality care. The other thing to point out is the residential care facilities, that we've actually decreased by 77 facilities over the last 5 years, but we've increased by over 6,000 beds. So what this means is that we're losing our smaller mom and pop, the 6 beds. And so we're getting larger corporations, those faceless stakeholder groups. These are much more difficult for the average ombudsman to really make systemic change. Very difficult to make change when you're having to send off letters to multiple corporation levels of management as opposed to working with an administrator directly. So the facility monitoring data, and this really is the basis of our funding request. So over the last 5 years, since the elimination of general funds in 2008, 62% fewer facilities receive those quarterly visits. That's a lot of people that never had an opportunity to share their concern or to know that someone cared about them as far as the ombudsman. And when you're sharing this data with the legislators, this is very telling information that when we had funding, we were in those buildings. We were meeting with people. We were educating staff. We were working with facility administrations. We were making things better. And now, as our resources are stretched thinner and thinner, our ability to get into facilities for those non-complaint related visits has dropped dramatically, because most programs are very much in just firefighting mode, and we go from one complaint to the next without really having the benefit of going back and making those changes and keeping on top to ensure that those changes are kept in place. Some fun statistics, because it's just nice to maybe put a few of these in a letter or an email or just to share with the local representative, that there are 35 local long-term care ombudsman programs, that these are covered in our area agency on aging. that we have 108 full-time equivalent paid staff. I would like to point out that when we had our funding, we were at 183 full-time staff, so that's a pretty big drop. We currently have 856 certified volunteers. There are 8,842 licensed long-term care facilities with the ability to serve over 296,000 residents. So this is a scary statistics. The long-term care ombudsman program, what do we do? When you're meeting with those legislators, key in on what makes us unique, what makes us non-duplicative as far as licensing or DPH. We improve the quality of life of seniors. Because we receive and investigate elder abuse complaints, we are that entity that combats elder abuse. And I think it's very important to point out that we are an incredible cost saver to the state, because we know that we help reduce medical costs by intervening before bad situations become tragic situations. These are the things that Ernie has taught me this year. I've learned that elected officials are accountable to voters. I saw this in our legislative meetings where ombudsmen from out of the area came and met with the representatives, and they were really impressed. They stopped what they were doing because a voter took the time to go and meet with them. So it really did cement what Ernie has been saying, that we do have a voice, that our story is very important, so we need to have confidence in our position. The Ombudsman program is worthy of this money. And Ernie is everything. So he's let me put his phone number and his email address out there, and you're always welcome to contact me as the Executive Director for CLTCOA. Happy to help you. Very excited about this funding effort and feel very good about where we stand this year. We've made a lot of good friends at the Capitol. The hearings have gone well, but it's that final push, and that final push is local outreach. We've got to generate that buzz out in the home offices that's then translated into votes at the Capitol. So I think I'm done here. Ernie, did you have any final parting wisdom you wanted to add?
Just if you have any questions, ask. Use the resources we have. I'm impressed with the level of enthusiasm and determination to win this fight, and I think it's winnable, and I think it's doable. And I both thank you and I want to tell you how happy I am to be part of this. So thank you very much for being engaged. It is what democracy is about, and it is what it means to help a very vulnerable population. Those are my final words. Thank you again.
Okay, thank you, Ernie, and thank you to all of you who've turned in to listen to this. As I said, the supporting documents will be emailed to you, and you are encouraged to go to the CLTCOA website, www.CLTCOA.org, and you can download the materials directly there also. So thank you, and have a great day.